March 15, 1945. The acrid smoke of burning documents filled General Wilhelm Keitel's bunker office as he stared at the intelligence reports scattered across his desk. 2 years earlier, his staff had confidently calculated that America could field perhaps 4 million soldiers at most, a respectable force, but manageable for the Wehrmacht's seasoned divisions. Americans fight with their factories, not their hearts, he had told Hitler in 1943. But now, as Keitel reviewed the latest prisoner interrogations and Allied intercepts, a terrifying reality was crystallizing before his eyes. The enemy wasn't fielding 4 million soldiers. They had mobilized over 16 million Americans into uniform, creating the largest military force in human history. What the German High Command had dismissed as an industrial nation's limited manpower reserve had become an unstoppable human tide that would drown the Third Reich in its own miscalculations. The miscalculation began with arrogance disguised as analysis. In the mahogany-paneled briefing rooms of the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht in Zossen, south of Berlin, German military planners had spent months in 1942 studying American demographics and military potential. Their conclusions, delivered with characteristic Prussian confidence, seemed mathematically sound and scientifically unassailable. Dr. Helena Zimmermann, chief of the American Population Analysis Division, had spent her entire career studying demographic warfare. A brilliant mathematician who had earned her doctorate from the University of Heidelberg in 1934, she approached military manpower calculations with the same precision she had once applied to actuarial science. Her office walls were covered with population charts, industrial capacity graphs, and detailed breakdowns of American society that represented 2 years of meticulous research. On the gray morning of November 12, 1942, Dr. Zimmermann had presented her findings to the assembled General Staff in Conference Room Alpha at the Zossen compound. The presentation would become the foundational document for all German strategic planning regarding American military capability, and its conclusions would prove catastrophically wrong. "Gentlemen," she had begun, adjusting her wire-rimmed spectacles as she stood before a massive wall map of North America. "The United States presents us with a demographic puzzle that mathematics can solve with precision. Their population of 132 million contains approximately 22 million males between the ages of 18 and 35. This represents their theoretical maximum military recruitment pool." General Franz Halder, then chief of the General Staff, had leaned forward with interest. Dr. Zimmermann was known for her analytical rigor, and her assessments had proven accurate in evaluating Soviet manpower reserves on the Eastern Front. If anyone could decode American potential, it was the woman who had successfully predicted Stalin's ability to field replacement armies. However, Dr. Zimmermann continued, clicking her pointer against the demographic charts, democratic societies face fundamental limitations that totalitarian states can overcome. The United States cannot simply conscript every able-bodied male. Their industrial economy requires skilled workers who cannot be replaced by women or elderly men. Their agricultural sector demands significant male labor for food production. Most critically, their political system cannot withstand the social disruption that total mobilization would create. She had moved to a second chart showing American industrial employment. Conservative estimates suggest that 8 million American males are absolutely essential for war production and cannot be released for military service. Another 3 million are required for agriculture and transportation. An additional 2 million are either physically unfit or engaged in essential civilian services. Colonel Heinrich Brenner, Dr. Zimmermann's deputy, and a former insurance statistician from Munich, had provided the supporting calculations. This leaves approximately 9 million American males theoretically available for military service,
However, democratic armies historically maintain only 30 to 40% of their theoretical maximum strength due to political constraints, recruitment inefficiencies, and voluntary enlistment limitations. Dr. Zimmermann had concluded with mathematical certainty. The United States can sustain a maximum of 3.5 to 4 million men under arms simultaneously. This represents their absolute demographic ceiling, assuming optimal recruitment and minimal political resistance. More realistically, we should expect American ground forces to peak at 2.8 million soldiers, with perhaps 1.8 million deployed overseas at any given time. The room had erupted in satisfied murmurs. General Alfred Jodl, chief of the operations staff, had stood to congratulate Dr. Zimmermann on her thorough analysis. "Excellent work, Doctor. These figures confirm our strategic assumptions. The Americans may possess industrial strength, but they lack the human resources to challenge German military supremacy in a prolonged conflict." Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, head of the OKW, had been particularly pleased with the demographic constraints Dr. Zimmermann had identified. So the Americans face an impossible choice. They can build tanks or field soldiers, but not both in meaningful numbers. Their democracy prevents the total mobilization that victory requires.
British Hitler himself had reviewed Dr. Zimmermann's report in December 1942, scrawling approving comments in the margins. "The mongrel democracy reveals its weakness," he had written next to the section on political constraints. "Germans fight with blood and iron. Americans fight with committees and factory workers." This analysis became holy doctrine. German war planning throughout 1943 and early 1944 assumed that American ground forces would peak at roughly 4 million soldiers total, with no more than 2 million ever deployed to European theaters. It was a reasonable estimate based on historical precedent, demographic science, and everything German military academies had taught about the limitations of democratic warfare. Dr. Zimmermann's calculations had been based on the finest German scholarship available. She had studied the American Civil War, noting that the Union had peaked at approximately 2.8 million soldiers despite facing an existential threat. She had analyzed World War I American mobilization, observing that the United States had fielded only 4.7 million military personnel over the entire course of the conflict, with peak simultaneous strength of 2.4 million. Every historical precedent supported her mathematical conclusions. What neither Dr. Zimmermann nor her colleagues could have anticipated was that they were not analyzing a conventional democracy preparing for a conventional war. They were studying a sleeping industrial giant about to undergo the most complete societal transformation in human history. The first hints that something was wrong began reaching German intelligence in the spring of 1943, but they were dismissed as Allied disinformation. Captain Klaus Richter, an intelligence officer attached to the German embassy in neutral Switzerland, had intercepted American radio transmissions discussing military unit formations that seemed to exceed Dr. Zimmermann's projections. "The Americans are claiming to have activated over 200 individual regiments," Richter had reported to Berlin in May 1943. "If accurate, this suggests ground forces approaching 6 million men, which contradicts our demographic analysis by more than 100%. Dr. Zimmermann had personally reviewed Richter's intercepts and dismissed them in a confidential memo to General Jodl. "Captain Richter has intercepted obvious disinformation designed to inflate American military strength. The numbers he reports would require the United States to conscript nearly 30% of their military-age population, while simultaneously maintaining industrial production. This is mathematically impossible for any democratic society." She had been supremely confident in her analysis because it was based on the best German understanding of how societies functioned under stress.
German social scientists had studied democratic limitations for decades, observing how political constraints prevented optimal resource allocation. The Americans, with their competing political parties, labor unions, and individual rights, simply could not achieve the mobilization efficiency that characterized National Socialist Germany. By the autumn of 1943, however, the evidence of something unprecedented was becoming harder to ignore. Major Ernst Weber, a logistics specialist with Army Group South in Italy, had been capturing increasing numbers of American prisoners whose unit designations didn't match German intelligence files. "I have personally interrogated soldiers from the 36th, 45th, 88th, and 91st Infantry Divisions," Weber had reported to OKW in October 1943. "According to our order of battle estimates, these units should not exist. The 91st Division alone represents 15,000 men who exceed our projected American deployment to the Mediterranean theater." Dr. Zimmerman had traveled to Italy personally to investigate Weber's claims. Her subsequent report, classified as most secret and distributed only to the highest levels of German command, revealed the first cracks in her analytical certainty. "Major Weber's observations are accurate," she had written. "American forces in Italy demonstrate organizational capacity exceeding our baseline projections. However, this likely represents a temporary surge achieved by stripping forces from Pacific operations and homeland defense. The Americans cannot sustain such deployment levels without compromising other strategic priorities." She had maintained her core assessment while acknowledging the disturbing evidence. Total American mobilization may temporarily exceed 4 million during peak operational periods, but demographic constraints ensure this cannot be sustained beyond 18 to 24 months without economic collapse. Dr. Zimmerman's revised estimates still assumed that American society would reach a breaking point where industrial needs and military recruitment would create an irreconcilable conflict. German economic theory held that democratic systems could not maintain both massive military forces and adequate production simultaneously. One would have to give way to the other. The flaw in this reasoning was that Dr. Zimmerman was analyzing American society through the lens of German experience. She understood how industrial mobilization worked in a resource-constrained environment where choices between military and civilian production were zero-sum propositions. What she could not comprehend was an economy of such abundance that traditional either-or decisions became obsolete. Lieutenant Colonel Gerhard Sommer, a former economics professor from the University of Vienna, who served as Dr. Zimmerman's senior researcher, had begun to suspect that their fundamental assumptions might be flawed by early 1944. His private correspondence with Dr. Zimmerman, later captured by Allied forces, revealed a growing unease with their demographic models.
"Helena," he had written in February 1944, "the American production figures we're receiving from our industrial intelligence network cannot be reconciled with our manpower projections. They appear to be simultaneously increasing military recruitment and expanding war production. This should be impossible according to every economic principle we understand." Dr. Zimmerman had responded with characteristic analytical precision. "Gerhard, we must remember that American statistics are often inflated for propaganda purposes. Their democratic system encourages exaggeration of achievements. Additionally, they may be achieving temporary production increases through unsustainable measures, excessive working hours, dangerous shortcuts, inferior quality control. Such methods inevitably lead to system breakdown." But Dr. Zimmerman's confidence was beginning to waver privately, even as she maintained official certainty.
Her personal diary, discovered in the ruins of Berlin in 1945, revealed a brilliant mind struggling with evidence that contradicted her most fundamental beliefs about how societies functioned. March 18, 1944. Reports from France indicate American forces have landed supplies sufficient for operations involving 8 to 10 divisions simultaneously. Logistics requirements for such forces suggest deployment of nearly 400,000 men to the Western European theater alone. Combined with Mediterranean operations, this approaches our total projected American overseas deployment capability. Yet, Pacific operations continue at full intensity. Something in our analysis is fundamentally incorrect. The D-Day landings in June 1944 shattered Dr. Zimmerman's carefully constructed demographic models completely. The scale of the American contribution to Operation Overlord defied every calculation she had made about democratic mobilization limitations. Colonel Heinrich Brenner, now promoted to lead the American Forces Assessment Division, had compiled the initial German intelligence assessment of the Normandy invasion. His report, delivered to Dr. Zimmerman on June 12, 1944, represented a mathematical catastrophe for German strategic planning. The Americans have committed approximately 120,000 troops to the initial invasion, Brenner had reported. Follow-up formations suggest they are prepared to deploy an additional 400,000 soldiers to the Western Front within 90 days. This exceeds our total projected American ground forces available for European operations by more than 200%. Dr. Zimmerman had requested an immediate meeting with General Keitel to discuss the implications. Her presentation on June 15, 1944, marked the beginning of her transformation from confident analyst to troubled questioner of German assumptions. "Gentlemen," she had begun, her usual certainty replaced by visible uncertainty, "the American deployment to Western Europe suggests that our demographic analysis contained significant errors. Either the Americans have discovered methods of mobilization unknown to German social science, or our fundamental understanding of democratic limitations is incomplete." General Keitel had been less interested in Dr. Zimmerman's analytical doubts than in finding explanations that preserved German strategic assumptions. "Doctor, is it possible that the Americans have weakened their Pacific operations to achieve this Western concentration? Perhaps they are gambling everything on a single theater." Dr. Zimmerman had consulted her intelligence files on Pacific operations before responding. What she found disturbed her even more than the European deployment figures. "General, our intelligence indicates that American operations against Japan have actually intensified since D-Day. The simultaneous expansion of both Pacific and European operations suggests total American military strength far exceeding our projections." She had paused, removing her glasses to clean them nervously, a gesture her staff recognized as a sign of profound analytical distress. "If current intelligence is accurate, the United States may have mobilized 8 to 10 million military personnel, with perhaps 6 million in ground combat formations. This is 3 times our projected maximum." The room had fallen silent. General Halder, now relegated to ceremonial duties but still attending briefings, had asked the question that hung in everyone's mind. "Doctor, if the Americans can field 10 million soldiers while maintaining industrial production, what does this mean for our strategic position?" Dr. Zimmerman had looked down at her calculations, filled with corrections and question marks that reflected her growing confusion. "General, if these numbers are accurate, we are not fighting the limited war we planned for. We are facing an enemy with effectively unlimited manpower reserves relative to our own capacity." The briefing had ended in uncomfortable silence. Hitler, informed of Dr. Zimmerman's revised assessment, had flown into one of his characteristic rages. "German science does not make such errors," he had screamed at Keitel. "Either your analysts are incompetent, or they have been infected with defeatist propaganda. I will not hear that Americans can achieve what Germans cannot. Dr. Zimmerman had been ordered to produce a new analysis that explained American numbers without contradicting Nazi theories about democratic weakness. Her subsequent report, completed in August 1944, represented a brilliant mind trying to reconcile irreconcilable evidence with ideological requirements.
The Americans have achieved temporary mobilization levels exceeding historical precedent through unsustainable methods, she had written. Their use of women in industrial roles, their integration of racial minorities into military service, and their acceptance of lower training standards have allowed artificial inflation of military strength. However, such methods inevitably produce social instability and military ineffectiveness that will manifest in coming months. But even as Dr. Zimmerman wrote these words, she had private doubts that she confided only to her diary. August 23, 1944. American military performance shows no signs of the degradation that our theory predicts. Their integrated units fight effectively. Their female workforce maintains production quality. Their system appears to be achieving the impossible, total mobilization without social collapse. I fear we have misunderstood something fundamental about American society. By the autumn of 1944, the evidence had become overwhelming. Major Klaus Richter, now assigned to interrogate American prisoners in Germany, had compiled data that destroyed any remaining possibility that Dr. Zimmerman's original projections were accurate. I have personally interviewed over 400 American prisoners captured on the Western Front, Richter had reported in October 1944. They represent portions of 47 different divisions, including 12 armored divisions. Based on standard organizational structures, this suggests total American ground forces approaching 12 million men, with at least 8 million deployed overseas. Dr. Zimmerman had personally interviewed dozens of these prisoners, using her fluent English to conduct detailed conversations about American military organization. What she learned transformed her understanding not just of American capabilities, but of the nature of modern industrial warfare itself. Sergeant James Morrison of the 90th Infantry Division, captured near Metz in November 1944, had provided Dr. Zimmerman with information that shattered her final illusions about American limitations. During what Morrison believed was casual conversation, he had revealed details of American mobilization that defied every German assumption. "We got guys from every state, every background, farm boys from Iowa, factory workers from Detroit, college kids from California. My company alone has guys who were teachers, mechanics, store clerks, even a few lawyers. The whole country just sort of turned into soldiers." Dr. Zimmerman had asked carefully crafted questions about American training and unit organization. Morrison's responses revealed a system of military production that resembled industrial manufacturing more than traditional army recruitment. They set up these massive training camps, Camp Polk, Camp Hood, Fort Benning, each one bigger than most German cities. They take in 50,000 recruits at a time, process them through standardized training, then ship them out to new divisions. It's like a factory for soldiers. When Dr. Zimmerman had asked about the impact on American civilian life, Morrison's response had shocked her. "Oh, everybody's involved somehow. My sister builds aircraft engines, my mom organizes scrap drives, my dad's too old for the draft, but he works double shifts at the steel mill. It's not like the military is separate from everything else. The whole country is basically one big war machine now." That evening, Dr. Zimmerman had written in her diary, November 15th, 1944. "I have been studying American society as if it were simply a larger version of European democracies. This is fundamentally incorrect. The Americans have created something entirely new, a democratic system capable of total mobilization without abandoning democratic principles. They have not chosen between military strength and industrial production. They have achieved both simultaneously through methods we did not believe possible." The final revelation had come through captured American military documents obtained during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944. Dr. Zimmerman had been assigned to analyze seized personnel records that provided a comprehensive picture of American military organization. What she discovered represented the complete collapse of every assumption German military planning had made about democratic limitations. The documents revealed that the United States had mobilized over 16 million Americans into military service across all branches. The Army alone contained 8.3 million soldiers organized into 91 divisions. The Navy had expanded from 160,000 personnel in 1940 to over 3.4 million. The Army Air Forces had grown to 2.4 million airmen. Even the Marine Corps, traditionally a small elite force, had ballooned to 485,000 Marines. Dr. Zimmerman had spread these documents across her office floor, calculating and recalculating the numbers with growing amazement and horror. The Americans had not just exceeded her projections, they had mobilized nearly 5 times more military personnel than her mathematical models had deemed possible for any democratic society. Her final report to the German High Command, completed on February 28, 1945, represented both a professional confession of analytical failure and a warning about the implications for German strategy. The United States has achieved military mobilization exceeding 16 million personnel while simultaneously maintaining industrial production at record levels, she had written. This accomplishment contradicts every principle of demographic warfare that German military science considers fundamental. We have not simply underestimated American numbers, we have misunderstood the nature of American society.
She had concluded with a stark assessment that would prove prophetic. Germany planned for war against a traditional democracy with conventional limitations. Instead, we face an industrial civilization that has transformed its entire population into a war-making apparatus. Mathematical analysis suggests that continued resistance against such overwhelming human and material superiority can only result in German defeat. Dr. Zimmerman's report had been classified as most secret and distributed to only 5 individuals in the German hierarchy. Hitler's response had been swift and final. Dr. Zimmerman was reassigned to research duties in a basement office, and her American Analysis Division was disbanded. The truth she had discovered was too dangerous for the Third Reich to acknowledge, even as that truth advanced inexorably toward Berlin. As General Keitel would discover on that smoke-filled day in March 1945, Dr. Zimmerman's final calculations had been devastatingly accurate. The 16 million Americans in uniform represented more than a military force. They were the manifestation of an entire civilization mobilized for total war, guided by industrial methods and democratic determination that German doctrine had never imagined possible. The systematic unraveling of German assumptions accelerated dramatically as 1945 dawned, bringing with it an avalanche of evidence that transformed Dr. Zimmerman's theoretical concerns into undeniable reality. What had begun as statistical anomalies in captured documents became a crushing revelation of strategic blindness that would cost the Third Reich everything. Colonel Marguerite Kruger, chief interrogator at Prisoner Processing Center Alpha near Frankfurt, had spent her career extracting military intelligence from captured enemies. A former criminal psychologist from the University of Berlin, she possessed an analytical mind perfectly suited for detecting deception and evaluating information reliability. By January 1945, her interviews with American prisoners had produced a comprehensive picture of enemy capabilities that shattered every remaining German illusion about democratic limitations. "The scale defies comprehension," Kruger had written in her confidential report to OKW dated January 18, 1945. "I have personally interrogated
847 American prisoners, representing 73 different divisions across all service branches. Based on standard military organization, this sample suggests total American ground forces exceeding 10 million soldiers, with additional millions in naval and air service. Kruger's methodology was meticulous. She had developed a systematic approach to prisoner interrogation that extracted organizational details without alerting subjects to German intelligence requirements. Through seemingly casual conversations about hometowns, training experiences, and unit histories, she had assembled a database that revealed the true scope of American mobilization. Private Robert Chen, captured during the Battle of the Bulge, had provided Kruger with information that illustrated the industrial scale of American military production. During what Chen believed was friendly conversation, he had described his training experience at Camp Roberts in California. "Biggest thing I'd ever seen," Chen had told Kruger in broken German, unaware that she spoke fluent English. 40,000 guys all training at once. They told us it was just one of 23 camps that size. Every 6 weeks they'd graduate entire divisions and ship them out, then bring in fresh recruits to start over. Kruger had carefully calculated the implications. 23 training facilities processing 40,000 soldiers every 6 weeks meant the Americans were producing over 650,000 trained soldiers annually from training camps alone, more than the entire Wehrmacht could recruit and train in optimal circumstances. Sergeant Maria Santos, a Latina soldier from Texas captured near Strasbourg, had described the diversity of American forces in terms that challenged German racial theories. "My company's got guys from everywhere," Santos had explained during interrogation. "Irish kids from Boston, Italian guys from New York, Polish farmers from Wisconsin, Mexican ranchers from California, all of us fighting together like we're family." For Kruger, who had been indoctrinated with Nazi theories about the weakness of racially diverse societies, Santos's testimony was profoundly disturbing. German military doctrine held that only racially homogeneous forces could achieve true unit cohesion. Yet the American military's integration of diverse populations appeared to be producing effective combat units rather than the social chaos German theory predicted. Colonel Jonathan Washington, an African-American officer captured near Colmar, had provided Kruger with perhaps the most psychologically devastating revelation about American society. Washington commanded an integrated combat engineer unit and held a degree from Howard University, facts that contradicted everything German intelligence had been told about racial limitations in American military organization. "The segregation is wrong, and we're fighting to change it. But even with our current limitations, we've got over 700,000 Negro Americans serving in uniform. Pilots, tank crews, combat engineers, artillery specialists. We're proving that America's strength comes from including everyone, not excluding people." Kruger had verified Washington's claims through cross-referencing with other prisoner testimonies. The existence of large-scale African-American military service represented a resource pool that German analysts had completely ignored in their demographic calculations. Dr. Zimmerman's original projections had assumed that racial tensions would prevent effective integration of minorities into American military service. Instead, the United States had mobilized minority populations as an additional source of military manpower. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, a Women's Army Corps officer captured while serving as a communications specialist near the Rhine, had revealed another dimension of American mobilization the German planners had never considered. Mitchell commanded a signals unit staffed entirely by women and had described a female military organization numbering in the hundreds of thousands. "We're not just nurses and clerks anymore," Mitchell had explained during interrogation. Women are serving as radio operators, mechanics, pilots, intelligence analysts, even as military police. The WAC alone has over 150,000 women, and that's just the Army. The Navy's got waves, the Marines have women Marines, the Coast Guard has spars, probably close to 400,000 women in uniform total. For Kruger, the revelation that Americans had militarized their female population represented a complete breakdown of German assumptions about democratic social organization. German military doctrine assumed that women would remain in civilian roles, limiting the available male population for military service. The Americans had solved this constraint by mobilizing women for military duties, freeing additional men for combat roles. The evidence extended far beyond individual testimonies. Captured American military documents, mail censored from prisoner correspondence, and intelligence gathered from neutral countries painted a consistent picture of mobilization on a scale that German military science had deemed impossible for any society, democratic or otherwise. Major Ingrid Hoffmann, Dr. Zimmermann's former deputy who had been reassigned to document analysis, had compiled captured American unit histories that revealed the breathtaking pace of military expansion. Her report, dated February 15, 1945, documented the systematic creation of an entire military civilization. The Americans activated 91 infantry divisions, 16 armored divisions, 5 airborne divisions, and numerous specialized units between 1940 and 1944, Hoffmann had written. Each division required 15,000 to 17,000 personnel plus supporting elements. Simple mathematics indicates ground forces approaching 8.5 million soldiers before counting naval, air, and support personnel. Hoffmann had included detailed breakdowns showing how Americans had solved the training bottleneck that German analysts assumed would limit rapid expansion. They constructed 142 major training installations, each capable of processing 20,000 to 50,000 recruits simultaneously. Training cycles were standardized and accelerated through industrial methods, reducing time from civilian to combat-ready soldier from traditional 18-month periods to 4 to 6 months. The industrial approach to military training had fascinated and horrified German observers. Captain Klaus Richter, now assigned to analyze captured training manuals, had discovered that Americans treated soldier production like manufacturing assembly lines. They have created specialized schools for every military function, Richter had reported. Tank driving schools that graduate 1,000 operators monthly, artillery schools producing 2,000 gunners every 6 weeks, leadership academies that commission 500 officers per month. Each school operates continuously, feeding trained personnel into an expanding military organization. Perhaps most disturbing for German planners was the evidence of American logistical capabilities that supported such massive forces. Lieutenant Colonel Erika Steinberg, a former logist.
Instead, she discovered exactly the opposite. American prisoners consistently described military service as an improvement in their living conditions compared to Depression-era civilian life. Many prisoners report that military service provided them with better housing, more reliable food, improved health care, and greater opportunities than they had experienced as civilians, Weber had written in her psychological assessment. Corporal Michael O'Brien, captured near Aachen, had described his military experience in terms that revealed the social transformation accompanying American mobilization. "Before the war, I was unemployed in Detroit," O'Brien had told Weber. "Now, I've got 3 square meals, clean clothes, medical care, and I'm learning skills I can use after the war. The Army gave me opportunities I never would have had." This pattern repeated across hundreds of interviews. Rather than experiencing military service as a burden imposed by wartime necessity, American soldiers consistently described it as social mobility and economic opportunity. The military had become a mechanism for improving the lives of citizens while simultaneously creating the largest fighting force in human history. Weber had concluded her assessment with observations that challenged fundamental German assumptions about the relationship between individual welfare and military effectiveness. American military organization appears to enhance rather than sacrifice individual welfare, she had written. This creates positive feedback loops where military service becomes socially desirable rather than merely patriotic obligation, enabling sustained recruitment at levels that traditional coercive methods could not achieve. The evidence of American abundance extended to technological capabilities that German intelligence had completely underestimated. Captain Brunhild Richter, a former electrical engineer assigned to analyze American captured equipment, had discovered production capabilities that revolutionized her understanding of industrial warfare. Every American soldier carries equipment superior to what German elite units receive, Richter had reported after examining gear taken from prisoners. Individual weapons, communication devices, protective equipment, even personal items demonstrate manufacturing quality and standardization that suggests unlimited production capacity. She had been particularly struck by the ubiquity of American radio communications. German military doctrine concentrates radio equipment at battalion level and above due to production constraints, Richter had noted. American forces provide individual radio sets to every squad, every vehicle, every aircraft. This represents production of military electronics exceeding German civilian and military output combined. The revelation of American air power had been equally devastating for German strategic assumptions. Major Gisela Hoffmann, a former Luftwaffe pilot assigned to interrogate captured American airmen, had compiled evidence of aerial mobilization that dwarfed German capabilities. American prisoners report training at over 60 different flight schools across the United States, Gisela Hoffmann had written. Each school graduates 200 to 400 pilots monthly. Total American pilot production approaches 100,000 annually, more than the Luftwaffe has trained in its entire existence. The numbers were staggering, but the quality was equally impressive. American pilots received 200 to 300 hours of flight training before deployment, compared to the 50 to 80 hours that German pilots were receiving by 1945 due to fuel shortages. American aircraft were newer, better maintained, and supported by logistic systems that guaranteed replacement of losses within days rather than months. Lieutenant Colonel Brunhild Schmidt, assigned to analyze American prisoner mail for intelligence purposes, had discovered through censored correspondence that American aircraft production had achieved levels that German industry could not match, even under optimal conditions. Prisoner letters reference factory workers producing a bomber per hour and 3 fighters daily, Schmidt had reported. While such claims may be exaggerated, the consistency of reports suggests aircraft production measured in tens of thousands annually. German intelligence estimates of American aviation strength appear to be understated by factors of 5 to 10. The mail censorship program had revealed other aspects of American society that explained their mobilization success. Families routinely described relatives working in defense industries, growing victory gardens, participating in scrap drives, and buying war bonds. Rather than experiencing mobilization as hardship, American civilians appeared to view war work as patriotic opportunity and economic advancement. Private letters described women earning wages in aircraft factories that exceeded their husbands' pre-war salaries. Families purchased automobiles, appliances, and homes with wartime earnings. Rather than sacrificing civilian welfare for military production, Americans seemed to be achieving both simultaneously through methods that German economic theory considered impossible. Dr. Zimmermann, despite her official reassignment, had continued her demographic analysis through unofficial channels. Her private correspondence with Colonel Kruger revealed a brilliant mind grappling with evidence that overturned everything she had believed about societal limitations. "Great," she had written in March 1945, "the Americans have not simply mobilized more soldiers than we predicted, they have transformed the entire concept of what mobilization means. Traditional societies face choices between military strength and civilian welfare. American society has eliminated this choice through industrial abundance that provides both simultaneously."
The correspondence between the two women, discovered in ruins after the war, documented the intellectual journey of German professionals forced to confront the bankruptcy of their analytical frameworks. Dr. Zimmermann's final letters revealed a woman who had fundamentally revised her understanding of modern civilization itself. "We analyzed American society as if it were simply a larger version of European democracies," she had written. "This was our fatal error. The Americans have created something entirely new, an industrial democracy capable of total mobilization without sacrificing democratic principles or civilian welfare. They have not chosen between individual freedom and collective power. They have achieved both through methods we did not believe possible." By March 1945, the evidence compiled by German intelligence painted a picture of American military strength that made continued resistance mathematically senseless. The United States had mobilized over 16 million personnel across all service branches, supported by industrial production that exceeded German capacity by margins of 10-1 in most categories. More significantly, American society showed no signs of the strain that German theory predicted would limit democratic mobilization. Civilian morale remained high, industrial production continued expanding, and military recruitment proceeded without coercion or significant resistance. Colonel Kruger's final intelligence assessment, submitted to General Keitel on March 20, 1945, represented the complete collapse of German strategic assumptions about democratic limitations. The enemy has achieved military mobilization of 16.1 million personnel while simultaneously maintaining civilian production at record levels, she had written. This accomplishment contradicts every principle of resource allocation that German military science considers fundamental. We have not simply underestimated American numbers, we have misunderstood the nature of American civilization itself. She had concluded with a stark assessment that would prove prophetic. Germany prepared for war against a traditional democracy with conventional limitations. Instead, we face an industrial civilization that has transformed its entire population into a war-making apparatus without abandoning the individual freedoms that we assumed would prevent effective mobilization. Mathematical analysis suggests that continued resistance against such overwhelming superiority can only result in complete German defeat. The report had been classified immediately and distributed to only 3 individuals. Hitler's response was to order the arrest of several intelligence officers for defeatist propaganda. But no amount of ideological fury could change the mathematical reality that was advancing toward Berlin on multiple fronts. As General Keitel discovered while burning those intelligence documents on March 15, 1945, the truth Dr. Zimmermann and Colonel Kruger had uncovered was too devastating to acknowledge and too obvious to deny. The 16 million Americans in uniform represented not just military superiority, but the manifestation of a societal transformation that German doctrine had never imagined possible. The Third Reich had planned for war against a nation it fundamentally misunderstood, and that misunderstanding would cost them everything. In the smoking ruins of German cities, as American forces closed in from east and west, the price of analytical arrogance was becoming clear. They had not simply miscalculated American numbers, they had failed to comprehend the true nature of the civilization they had chosen to fight. The 16 million Americans advancing toward German soil were not merely soldiers, but the vanguard of an entirely new form of human organization, one that combined individual freedom with collective power, democratic principles with total mobilization, civilian welfare with military strength. It was a synthesis that German political theory had declared impossible, yet now it was rewriting the map of Europe with unstoppable force. As the spring of 1945 dawned over the dying Reich, Dr. Zimmermann's final calculation proved devastatingly accurate. Germany had not lost to superior tactics or better generals, but to a superior form of civilization itself. The mathematical certainty of defeat was written not just in blood and steel, but in the fundamental transformation of human society that the Americans had achieved, while German analysts convinced themselves it could never happen.